Welcome to the Why Not podcast with me, Chrissy Hawkins. In a world where everybody always asks why, I'm here to ask, why not? I'll be breaking down the mindsets of guests as well as my own in a bid to find out what makes people say, why not? Hello guys and welcome back to Why Not. So here is another interview for you today, guys. I'm going to talk to Patirck Butler, or Paddy the Panda as he is known on TikTok, and we're actually going to talk all about, well, a little bit about his TikTok and a little bit about a few other things, but mostly about his comeback from alcoholism, or his recovery from alcoholism, and yeah, what led him down the path that brought him to rehab. So really great conversation about addiction, because I know it's not really spoken about much in the country, and yeah, no holds barred interview. So as ever, I want you guys to either sit down and relax or walk and listen, but the best part is enjoy the podcast, and yeah, enjoy. Okay guys, so welcome back to the Why Not podcast. Today I have Patirck Butler, or if you're on TikTok, you may know him as Paddy the Panda. So he's quite a well-known TikToker, and also we have a psychology student and recovering addict. So very interesting stories here to come up today. Patirck, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Chrissy. I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's exciting to be talking to, well, you're a TikToker as well. Let's not downplay that.
A minnow.
Yeah, and I can assure you the whole TikTok thing was entirely accidental. But yeah, I'm loving it at the moment. So thanks very much for having me on.
So actually, well, we'll start off with the TikTok. Tell us how you created it and how you grew to, he has over 160,000 followers. So
it was entirely accidental. So I heard about the app and people were talking about it, and I thought it was just for kids and dancing and stuff like that. But I saw a political TikTok on Instagram, and I said, okay, maybe there's a sphere for me, because I've always been interested in politics. Went on, and you know, I was kind of found myself in USA TikTok, where lots of people were talking about what it's great to be Irish American, and they were very pro-Trump, etc. And I just wasn't having any of that. So I made some videos about how Irish Americans are not Irish, and people seem to like that. And it grew steadily, and kind of got very into the USA election and Donald Trump and stuff. Did some Donald Trump impressions and that kind of stuff. And out of nowhere, then this, you know, a guy who never does any kind of social media all of a sudden has 10,000 followers, and then 50,000, and then during the election it hit 100,000, and now I'm 160,000 people listening to the nonsense that comes out of me. It's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, that is actually, it shows you though, like how quickly, if you like, you can just blow up on if you catch the right audience, you know. And
it's interesting because I'm almost unknown in Ireland. Like, nobody knows who I am in Ireland, and like, I certainly, my family wouldn't know I'm on TikTok or anything like that, because only like 3% of those followers are from Ireland. The vast majority are USA and Canada. And the vast majority of those are females who just seem to like the accent. I think that's pretty much what it is. Nobody's really listening to me. They're just like, diddly-eye-dee-die. Oh, he's a great accent. Yeah, that's probably it.
It's an easy way to turn in. Have anyone questioned your Irish accent?
So people constantly ask if I'm English, or if I'm from Australia, or am I American? You know, I'm like, well, it's plain as day. You know, obviously I'm from Wexford originally, so I don't, how's it going on? You know, I don't talk like that anymore. But yeah, I think it's pretty obvious that I'm Irish, but people just like the brogue Irish. Yeah. So yeah,
the accent that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's what I'm asking, because I was wondering, like, were they like, but that's not a real Irish accent.
Yeah, no, like, people expect Ireland to be like Tom Cruise in that movie Far and Away, you know, with Nicole Kidman. It's like, if you Google the worst Irish accents in the history of cinema, Tom Cruise is number one. With but yes, it's top of the morning to your potatoes, and it's it's really like woeful. It's really bad. Yeah.
Another awful one is Leap Year. Did you ever see that one?
Oh, with Amy Adams, and I don't know what the guy's name is, but he's English as well. Or Gerard Butler in P.S. I Love You.
P.S. I Love You,
He's
yeah.
a Scotsman. I'm pretty
His
sure
accent's awful.
there's Irish actors available out there. I think, you can get the real authentic thing. You don't have to import it. So
I think Brendan Gleeson has been told to Irish up his accent before, and he's like, "Well, this is the accent. Get over yourself."
yeah,
And he doesn't change it. Like, he doesn't put an accent on anything. He'd be acting in an American film, and he'd be like, "Hello, I'm from Dublin."
yeah. He did Donald Trump recently in a big HBO TV series, and you could, maybe it's just the fact that we're Irish, but
Yeah.
I could hear the Irish in it. It was very obvious that it was Trump, but it was an Irish version of Trump. It was interesting. He got the mannerisms and everything, but yeah, the accent just wasn't 100%.
Slightly deviated.
Yeah.
How did you get into the psychology, actually?
Yeah, so it stems from, my, as you mentioned at the start, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I've been sober, my sober day is the 1st of January 2018. And it just stemmed from that. I had been interested in it before, but I was always too deep in active addiction to pursue it. And it's only after I got sober, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to do this. And I was involved previously in previous jobs with psychometric testing and software and that kind of side of things. So the psychology would have interested me then anyway. And then, once I got sober, I was like, right, I'm going back to college. I'm going to do psychology, and we're going to see what we can do with it.
Oh,
and it's been incredible. It's been a great journey. And college today is different than when I went to college originally. When I went to college originally back in 2002, you would have had like 40 hours classes a week, and there was no semesters. And now it's just like 15 hours a week.
Yeah.
And so there's an awful lot of time to do other things. So I'm really kind of lucky that way. Yeah.
That's cool, yeah. I know when I went to college, we had like 10 hours a week, but I was in a course that was known as the DOS course at DCU. So there were people doing 40-hour weeks.
It's like an arts degree or something, was it?
Yeah, it was media studies. So basically arts with cameras, or in my case, audio.
Yeah, excellent.
So tell us about your addiction. Like, what happened with...
Yeah, and that seems like such a flippant way to get into it.
I don't know how where do we start? Where do we go?
And I think that's just how you were just there kind of tells us all we need to know about addiction in Ireland as a whole. We are changed, but it's still that awkwardness around it.
Yeah.
And people are still afraid to kind of ask certain questions. And my approach to my addiction story and how I get through it is just to bear it. Put it all out there and just say, this is exactly how it is for me. There's no ambiguity. You'll know exactly, my journey, my story, and how I'm feeling on any particular day, because I think the more people like that, the more it becomes kind of the norm, because in Ireland still, you're ostracized more for not drinking than you are for drinking too much.
Yeah.
And then when you're drinking way too much, you're kind of shunned away, and you kind of end up, drinking alone in an apartment by yourself kind of thing. But so I mean, I'll start from where it began. I had my first drink when I was 12. And I remember, it was the day that Wexford won the All-Ireland in 1996 in the hurling. Yeah. And it was there was like a carnival atmosphere kind of thing. And I grew up in a house with, 8 siblings, and, there was 11 of us grew up in this like 2-bedroom house in a council estate in Wexford. So it was always chaotic. And I remember just having some mental health issues even back as far as then. But I just didn't know what they were. I had no labels to put on it. But I remember stealing a few cans of, was it Dutch Gold or something?
That's like such an Irish thing to start on, isn't it?
Of all things to start with, yeah. So I remember just drinking like 3 or 4 cans and, having that feeling of, everyone's happy, everyone's enjoying themselves. This is the thing that's doing it. And then a coping mechanism was born for me. And I had no idea at the time, but that using alcohol as a way to cope with my mental health, even at the age of 12, that's when things started. So over the next few years, you know, you hit your teens and then you have those kind of awkward years. But my mental health kind of suffered even more then. I was depressed as a teenager, but I didn't know it again. So I used to binge drink. And part of that then was, you know, being the class clown type of, you know, character, and it would bring out that kind of confidence that I wouldn't normally have. And being in a big family, kind of, you know, you have that kind of middle child syndrome where you're like, well, nobody sees me, nobody cares about me, and so you try and seek that kind of affirmation elsewhere. And that's what I was doing for most of my teens. You know, binge drinking at the weekends, looking for reasons to go drinking. You know, this is going to sound terrible, but at one point, you know, I was looking at websites to see who had passed away in my local area, so that I could go out and grieve for them. You know, completely, you know, silly, but terrible at the same time. But that's, I felt like I needed an excuse. But once I had that excuse, then people would, you know, treat me differently, and therefore I could, you know, wear another mask, as it were.
Yeah.
Then I got into my 20s, and, you know, so like in terms of school, I was always academically gifted, so I didn't really have to try that hard. You know, I went on to college, and, you know, college was crazy for me, you know, because, you know, all of a sudden, it's a party atmosphere, and you're like, yeah, well, everybody's doing it. So the thing about being an addict is, you know, for the vast majority of the time, until it gets to kind of break point, you're just trying to not be unveiled or revealed as the addict. You're doing everything you can to kind of preserve the facade. And certainly for most of my 20s, I was able to do that. But looking back,
did you realize it was a problem, or was it a case of, well, everyone is doing it, so there's nothing wrong with it, me? Or you were telling yourself that, or was there something kind of niggling at you, telling you there was something?
I knew I was always drinking too much. I knew I wasn't blacking out, but I was always drinking far too much. And people would comment, you know, you're able to put it away. I realized that I was drinking with an issue, or my drinking was an issue when I was about 23, when I was hiding bottles of wine in the car when I get home from work. And I'd be drinking most days at home from work, but so was my partner at the time. But I'd hide alcohol in the car because I knew I wouldn't be allowed to have like 2 bottles of wine. So I'd bring in one and then get the other one later. And I remember thinking, and it was very clear at that moment, so, well, I shouldn't really be doing this. I shouldn't really, like, that's not normal. But I didn't care. It was, you know, taking the blues away. And up until that point, any trauma that was in my life, any stress, any worry, financial or relationship issues, or bereavement in particular, it was always dealt and buried with through drink. So it was absolutely that coping mechanism. And I was able to maintain that mask, because I always felt that if somebody figured out who I actually was, then, you know, they'd lock me up and throw away the key, because it's really kind of, you really do have that imposter kind of syndrome. My mental health at that time was still pretty terrible. And again, even in Ireland, and back then, like, so we're talking 15 years ago, mental health just wasn't talked about in the same way as it is today. And even today, it's not talked about enough. But certainly 15 years ago, the thought of being suicidal, the thought of having anxiety, depression, were things that people didn't understand, and people are afraid of what they don't understand. So I was very reluctant to put a label on myself at that point. The only labels I was kind of proud of were, Paddy, he's fond of the drink, or he's a right fellow with a few pints in him, and
good lad for a night out.
Good lad for a night out, always good for a sing-song, that kind of stuff. But it's all about getting people to like you. And again, the only way I thought I could do that was by drinking as much as I could.
Yeah.
And then there was elements then of, you know, deviant practice, you know, so I drink driving a lot, you know, getting arrested for drink driving. And I have no problem saying that now. I'd never do it now, but at the time it was still almost normal to drink drive.
Now it's a lot
now
tougher.
It's complete faux pas, like absolutely nobody does it. Or, well, you would hope that nobody do it. But yeah, at the time it was, you know, put off the road for a couple of years. And again, even then I didn't think that the drinking was the problem. It was the cop who stopped me's problem, that they were at fault. And I was like, oh, they could have just let me off. I was almost home. And there was always an excuse for everything that was going wrong except for me, even though the common denominator in everything was me and my
Yeah.
behavior, my attitudes.
So you weren't taking ownership for it, you were blaming everyone else or everything else.
Absolutely, it was a complete blame game, and I had a victim complex as well. So it was a constant pity party, and you know, I never understood why my siblings weren't getting on with me. And looking back now, it's because I was always hitting them up for lends, you know, financial assistance and getting them to dig me out of holes and whatnot. But getting put off the road in particular should have been a massive red flag, but it absolutely wasn't. The big red flags didn't come until later. But every relationship I had ended, it started off with lies and deceit. Because I would always be afraid that they would know how much I drank, or they would stop me from drinking as much as I wanted. And then resentments would grow. And I knew at the start of a relationship almost how long the relationship would last, but it was like a stopgap, you know. And you know, my manipulation at that time in order to conceal my addiction and to keep the mask up and not be exposed was like top class. So I would be able to manipulate multiple different scenarios all of the time as a preventative measure to getting exposed as what I actually was. No, because I was terrified of it. The only thing I was afraid of was being exposed as you're an alcoholic and therefore you're going to be locked away in a mental asylum, you know, because of that. And you know, unfortunately I hurt an awful lot of people along the way, because it was almost like a chess game. You know, I was always thinking 7 moves ahead to make sure that I got the best decision for myself in order to get the best outcome for myself. And that might be something like starting a row today so that I could go drinking in 2 weeks' time with the lads.
Oh, really?
You know what I mean? So it would really, and you would be surprised, like narcissism and manipulation is really common amongst people who suffer addiction, because it's all we've learned, it's all we've known, and it's the most successful tools that we would have had to keep the drinking going. So you know, those are skills that you would have honed over 10, 20 years, and I still have that faculty now. Like I can switch on a switch now and be manipulative as I want. I know it's always going to be there, but the thing about it, you know, in psychology we call it ocean. Everybody has this openness, conscientiousness, empathy, agreeableness, and neuroses. So ocean. So you just stop feeding the neuroses, and feed, you know, the openness part, the conscientious, the empathy part, and it makes you a more rounded person. So it's not as big an issue, but that's still certainly there. And what feeds that is my ego. So I have to keep that in check all the time. Look, and so here's what happened then. The worst year of my life was 2017. You know, people might think, oh, it's when your mother died and stuff like that. I was absent mentally for all of that. 2017, I ended up living rough because I had lost my job, I lost my home, I lost my relationship. I was off the road for drink driving. I had no money, I had no source of income. I had no contact with any of my friends, any family, completely alone, and it was all done by me. So I had done it almost deliberately. I was in a downward spiral. Self-sabotage was real. I had said to some people that I needed help, but I was never really genuine about it. I'd gone to a couple of AA meetings, but never wanted to go back. You know, going to an AA meeting when you have 2 bottles of whiskey outside waiting for you, you know, it's kind of, you know,
feel a bit awkward.
Purpose. So, you know, for a good 6 months I was homeless, you know, and I was up in Dublin because that seemed to be the best place for me. And I was sleeping rough around, you know, the old cinema there in Smithfield.
Did they renovate that?
They did, yeah. So just before that, I was sleeping there, and it was, in my mind, it was completely normal, because you rationalize everything when you're in addiction, that everything that you're doing is exactly as you would expect, because oh, I have mental health issues, so what do you expect from me? Oh, I drink too much, what do you expect from me? And at that point I absolutely knew I was an alcoholic, but I just wasn't ready to accept it. And my mental health started to decline even more. Suicidal ideation came into things. Suicide attempts came into things. Hospitalization for, you know, drinking too much and lying to the doctors about how much you were drinking, but your bloods never lie, so they're like, okay,
they know.
I'll put them on fluids for 5 days. And the thing about that is you're in hospital for 5 days, and your addiction and your mind is telling you, well, Paddy, you survived that. You drank all of that and survived. So that means you can drink even more. And because you have no income, you're doing things to get money for drink, that maybe you shouldn't be doing at all. So I won't get into that, but there was certainly deviant stuff that I got into to make sure that I constantly had a source of income to buy drink, and always bought drink.
Yeah.
And at the end,
Drink can go ahead of food with it.
yeah, absolutely. And at the end, I was drinking maybe 3 liters of whiskey every day, every single day. Yeah. So from the second I wake up, I'm drinking to pass out and to hopefully die. That's how dark it got. Every time I drank, I was hoping that I wouldn't wake up that time.
Yeah.
Then that continued on for about 6 months, multiple hospitalizations. And then on New Year's Eve in 2017, I had accumulated a bag of, an assortment of pills. I had, a good amount of alcohol, and I was like, right, this is it. I'm going to have a little party for myself that I'm never going to wake up from. And I completely overdosed, and took almost every tablet that was there. I took all of the drink, and I was passed out for maybe 36 hours. And I woke up, I came to, I was on the floor, and there was vomit and everything else everywhere else. And it was this most surreal moment. Like, I was still drunk. I knew I was still drunk, but I knew that I wanted to wake up. It was the first time I woke up, and I was like, well, thank goodness for that.
Okay.
And then it was that moment of clarity. I'm not talking about, white lights or anything like that. Just that moment where I woke up, I'm glad I woke up, and I need to make sure that doesn't happen again. And that was the moment that changed the rest of my life so far. And I needed help and support.
When you broke contact with them, had people like friends and family tried to get you to stop before, and you were pushing them away, or were they kind of a bit of the whole Irish, if we don't mention it, it's not happening?
Yeah, so again, in Ireland, we have this whole thing where, being an overdrinker is fine, and most people overdrink. We're binge drinkers as a nation, and we've all got that relative, that uncle, the aunt, the cousin, the ex-boyfriend, the ex-girlfriend, whatever, who would have had issues, and it's completely normal to have people who drink too much. Some of my family would have reached out and said, look, you need to get a handle on this, we're not helping you out anymore, that kind of stuff. But isolation is the best friend of addicts, but also the worst enemy. So if people in your life are starting to pull away and drinking at home by themselves a lot more, or cutting contact but carrying on, if you don't know, like, I didn't let my family know where I was living or where I wasn't living at particular times. Again, even then, in the worst year of my life, I was trying to keep up this facade that things were far better than they actually were. Thinking in my mind that nobody actually noticed just how bad it was. Nobody knew that I was drunk every day. Nobody knew that I was drunk going to the supermarket, or that I hadn't washed myself in a week. Nobody knew. And that my behavior was perfectly normal until that mental break where I finally snapped. And my family didn't help for me to go to treatment or anything like that. They rightfully so took a step back, because ultimately self-efficacy is important. So if you're going to treatment and getting sober for you, and it's your decision, you're far more likely to get sober than if you're going to get help, because if you don't do this, I'm leaving you, or you'll never see the kids again, or we're cutting you off. That type of ultimatum typically doesn't work. It might get somebody to go to a rehab center or an AA meeting or something like that, but the reasoning for going is never your own. So it's a challenge that way. And I'm glad that they took a step back. I'm glad that they allowed me to go on that journey by myself, because I came out the other side of, say, rehab in particular, a stronger, better person. And I had that, personal motivation to stay sober after I got out of treatment.
What were the steps then you had to take once you had that moment of clarity? What happened next, or what did you do next?
Yeah, well, the first thing was I called an ambulance, and let them know what was going on. And luckily, I hadn't done any permanent damage or anything like that. I was brought to the
Yeah.
hospital. They did bloods and all of that. But I made a call to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I found their number online. It was the Leinster branch, and they told me that there was rehab centers that I could go to that weren't super expensive, because I thought for a long time that rehab was like going to cost me 10 grand a week, and it's you know, even if I wanted to get sober, I'd never have that kind of money, so what's the point? But there are other places, and I ended up in a place in Athy called Coonwera, and I was lucky because I made the call on New Year's Day, and on the 3rd of January I was in the waiting room, ready to be admitted.
To give you time to change your mind.
Well, yeah, they want you to kind of be a little bit sober going in. So I had stopped drinking, but the withdrawals were unbelievable. Like, yeah, it's scary. So, they say that you have to have a medical, detox, as it were, before you go in. But lots of people don't do that, and I certainly just tried to do it myself. And for the 2 days before I went in, the detox was, everything from, having seizures to hallucinations to palpitations to panic attacks, and at this time, like, I was having panic attacks maybe 30 or 40 every single day.
Wow.
And I was thinking, oh, I'm drinking to cure my anxiety, but the anxiety was being caused by the drinking, so it was a self-fulfilling prophecy. And going to doctors, they just threw medication. They never really asked a whole lot of questions. So, taking, like, benzos, as we call them, that just helped take the edge off a hangover and helped to drink more, and then it just fuels the cycle. But I rang the rehab center, and they said, okay, come on in on the Wednesday. I went in, and like, it was happened so quick, and they were like, don't worry about the money, don't worry about any of this, just get here and we'll take it from there. And they didn't talk to me about paying for it or anything like that until I was detoxed for 7 days with them. And it was a medicated detox. I spent 7 days in my pajamas, in a kind of a hospital bed type thing. And the thing about that is, after a week, then you think, well, I don't feel so bad. So maybe I wasn't as bad as what I thought. And you're constantly worried then, if I actually tell them what's going on inside my head, then they're going to lock me up forever. And one of the things that I always talk about, the biggest thing that I've learned to do in my adult life is to be able to talk about what's going on in my head in an honest way, not in a deceiving way. And after that first week in rehab, I learned how to talk, and that was just by, hey, I'm Paddy, I'm an alcoholic, this is how I'm here. And I thought that once I got this out, they're going to, like, look at me differently. And the first thing somebody said was, is that it? Thought you were going to share something new, because they had heard they'd heard the exact same story. And as it turned out, there was a group of 10 men in the room, and every single one of them had a similar, if not identical, story to me, but we were just all different ages. So the same coping mechanisms, the same burying your head in the sand type of mentality, the same avoidance type of behaviors, and the same coping mechanisms to grief, etc. We were all very similar people. And I spent 12 weeks with those men in treatment in Athy.
I think that's very common for men in Ireland, like, not maybe all around the world, but in Ireland in particular, because we don't really speak about our feelings, and even more so if you're a man, you're not allowed, are you?
Yeah, I would have. So I think this new generation of people are much more vocal about their thoughts and their feelings, and it's much more encouraged. But I think you and I are probably similar enough age. I'm in my mid-30s now, and I would have been at the tail end of that kind of lifestyle of just, if you're feeling it, don't talk about it, just bury it and just move on. And if you have to go to the doctor about it, don't be telling anybody, and suicide, in my youth or in my 20s was so common, especially in Wexford. There'd be, at least 3, suicides, from the river alone every single year. And a couple of my close friends, took their own lives, sadly, as well. And you never talked about that. You just knew it was something bad had happened, and even then, there was no counseling really. There was no supports available. So of course, if you're conditioned to react to grief like that, and you're not taught how to communicate properly in a healthy way, then that's a bad habit that it takes an awful lot to break.
Yeah.
But you can break it, and happily I did.
No, it's true. Yeah, no, I'm still in that generation where they don't speak, or you don't mention anything bad because all the neighbors think. Or
Well, I made a decision my first week in treatments. I made the decision that, okay, I'm going to be brutally honest about everything. I'm not no more lies. So my mom years and years ago used to say to me, if you don't lie, you have nothing to remember. And I never really understood that. But I can tell you, lying all the time, like narcissistically, and lying to every single person, it is exhausting. So constantly worrying about what you told Mark and what you told Paul, and making sure that they don't talk to each other, and then the interactions that they have, and you're monitoring everything all of the time. Again, trying not to be exposed for the liar that you were in the first place.
Yeah,
it's exhausting. It really is. I don't know how I did it.
Yeah.
I genuinely don't know how I was able to maintain that heightened level of paranoia, neuroses, panic, worry. But in the first week of treatment, I was like, right, just everything, I'm going to be upfront and honest. And it shocks people now when I tell them, yeah, I'm a recovering alcoholic. Completely shocked, like that I would be so blasé about just saying that I have a disease. Because if I said I had a broken leg, people are like, no worries. If I said I had epilepsy, people are like, oh gosh. But if you say you have an addiction, people are like, oh wow, how, like, oh, aren't you so brave for saying that? And it's like, no, it's just who I am.
Part of me.
It's just one of the things that's part of who I am now. Exactly. But people are shocked. But what I was also shocked about was when I got out of treatment, there's alcohol everywhere. Even going to the cinema, there's alcohol everywhere. So
yeah, that's a weird one.
Yeah,
As I would drink myself, but I've always find that odd. Like, why you're supposed to drive into the cinema? As far as I'm concerned, you're like.
And I get it that some people like, to have a glass of wine when they're watching a movie or something like that. But if you want a glass of wine, just have it at home, or don't make every social event. And I really struggled when I get out of treatment. Every social event and everything was based around drinking. Everything.
Yeah.
So I had to cut off contact with any of my mates from before I got sober. I moved away from Wexford. I'm now based in Carlow now, but I had to move away from people, places, and things. The things that were synonymous with me drinking. I had to cut all ties with all of that. And it meant that I couldn't go to bars and restaurants and the cinema even anymore. I went shopping at particular times of the day, so before 10 o'clock in the morning, because the alcohol aisles were closed, so you couldn't buy it. And that was just little things that I was doing every day. And then I got into hiking and going to the beach and things like that, and kind of a more spiritual side of me kind of came out because I was moving away from those normal social expected events that happen on a daily basis. Celebrating exams, I can't do that in the same way as everybody else does, or a wedding, or a funeral even, where people are, use alcohol as a comfort or a relaxant. I just kind of leave early, or if I go at all, it's a different life. But my life is fuller because I'm making those decisions now than if I was drinking. I'm sober now 3 years and 3 months, and I don't count the days per se, but because I take it one day at a time. Because even if I'm talking to people, I can't guarantee that I'll be sober tomorrow. I can't. I can never guarantee that at all. But I can guarantee that I'll try my best to stay sober today. And when you live in the day and when you're living in that moment, then you kind of appreciate an awful lot more. Than when you're like worrying about something that's happening in a few days' time, or worrying about an event that happened in the past, and constantly worrying about what everybody else thinks of you. So I've gotten to a place where, I have a motto, is like, what other people think of me is none of my business. I just do my own thing. and that makes me happy. So it's and it's certainly it's working so far. But yeah, it's good from that point of view.
The thing as well is like never take advice from someone you wouldn't touch places for. With
yeah, but I was a devil. I was a devil for the advice. You know, people in my life, people have always asked me for, and I've always been successful in everything I do. And that's I'm not bragging there, but I've always gone to the top of my field. If I'm part of an organization, I'll always become chairperson or something. I'll always get to the top, and people will always ask for advice, and I give great advice. But it's like, here's some great advice. Don't worry, I'm not using it because I'm in a downward spiral and you have no idea. But, I need far more help than you could ever need because, this is really trivial. But I've been like that, for the first 30 odd years of my life,
Did you say you're kind of that type A personality? It's like laser vision with stuff.
Yeah, I am. So,
which can obviously lead to...
I'll give an example. So I had COVID in January, and when I was in hospital, again, we're back to coping mechanisms. So yeah, I give up the drink, but sometimes I use food as a comfort thing, and I'm a hefty guy, but I'm 6'2", and I'm just a good 20 stone on me, but I hold it good well in the shoulders, but
you're tall, you guys can get away with it.
Yeah, exactly. But they told me in the hospital, look, you're diabetic, you're type 2 diabetes, we're going to have to give you, insulin now every single day and just medication and stuff like that. And I just said, no, give me the medication. Don't give me the injections just yet. Give me an opportunity to change things environmentally myself first. Yeah. So that was 8 weeks ago now. Yeah, it's about 8 weeks, 8 weeks or so ago. And I just went regimental, like straight into it. It was like, same with my addiction. It's like, okay, if I'm doing it, I'm doing it, and I'm doing it properly. So yeah, from day one, cold turkey on sugar, everything, and, changed my diet completely. In the last 8 weeks, I've lost 22 kilos. And I'm very active every single day, and my diet is completely different. But more importantly, all of my levels, my sugar levels and everything are perfect. Everything is normal. Yeah. And they're shocked that I was able to do that. But again, that type A personality is like, right, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to be fucking brilliant at it. Yeah, and that's
it can go both ways, like.
Yeah. So, but again, I have to make sure that it's healthy. I have to make sure that my ego is not fueling it. I have to make sure that I'm not losing weight so that other people can say, "Why aren't you great for losing the weight?" It's because I'm happier to lose the weight. And lots of times people in addiction are doing things for other people, and the reaction from other people, and it's all to feed that ego. That's where that we're not good enough, but we want to be the best possible versions of ourselves in their eyes, never in our own eyes. So that's the type of personality that I have. Whereas in the past, it would have always ended, in rubble. Like I would have shot myself in the foot and sabotaged everything. And now I'm maintaining it on a day-to-day basis, and it's really quite liberating, I have to say. It's really quite good.
How did you break the cycle of self-sabotage, or was that when you stopped drinking, you stopped self-sabotaging?
Yeah, it's kind of you become aware. It's just like that key word is awareness. So in week 3 in rehab, it was like the blindness of addiction, where they were talking, and every week in rehab, just like a theme, from unconditional love to the blindness of addiction to acceptance, etc. So the blindness of addiction is just like, well, why are you doing the things that you're doing, and the bad habits that you've gotten into? Once you can recognize the behaviors that you're engaging in, and you can recognize those early, you can change those pretty soon. So if you say something to me and I find that I'm getting really defensive, then it's an issue for me. I have to, that's a red flag for me, and I'll reflect on that, and I'll write, or I'll journal, or I'll go to a meeting. The key thing for me was working every single day on my addiction in some way, shape, or form. So I don't go to an AA meeting every single week, but I go to a couple, and now it's all online now as well because of COVID. But I do counseling, but I do addiction counseling, and I do regular psychotherapy as well. All of my drinking was primarily focused around trauma from my past. So lots of people just stop drinking and go to use kind of AA as a coping mechanism instead of the drink, whereas the drinking is typically is a symptom of something else. And that's where my psychology kind of kicks in, because, you know, I've been able to learn a lot about myself within the classes themselves. I'm like, that makes total sense to me now, you know. So I'm able to learn about myself, and I'm like, okay, well, this trauma has triggered these responses, these learned behaviors, and I reacted in X, Y, Z, but I need to react in A, B, C instead. So every single day I journal, or I do my counseling, or I go out into the fresh air, or I go to an AA meeting, or I talk to another alcoholic, or I try to help someone, or I use TikTok in a positive way. And that all helps. That all helps to keep my mind busy, to keep me from focusing and zeroing in on these kind of insecurities that I have. And if I focus on the insecurities, then the behaviors start to snowball, and then, you know, it's only a matter of time then before you drink again, you know. And drinking for me now would be akin to a suicide attempt, you know, because I know if I drank again, I would drink until I was ready to commit suicide again. You know, and I wake up in the morning and I say, okay, well, I'm not suicidal today, therefore I'm not going to drink today. And there's some slogans that kind of go with that, you know. The first drink costs you everything, but the second drink costs you a fiver, you know. You know, and for alcoholics, it's the case of, you know, once you start, you can't stop. You might be able to stop with 2 today, but by the end of the week, you're drinking 10. And then at the end of the week, you're like, okay, well, I'm only drinking at the weekends. And then it's like, oh, I'm not drinking in the morning. And then it's, oh, I'm only drinking beer. And then it's, okay, well, I'm not drinking spirits. And then it's, I'm only drinking spirits in the evening. And then it's, okay, I'm not drinking spirits, you know. And we call it the not yets. Where it's a cycle of, well, I can't be an alcoholic because I haven't done this yet, because that's what an alcoholic is. And in to the listeners, when you close your eyes and think of an alcoholic, everybody almost pictures that old man with a beard and scruffy hair sitting on the side of the roads or in the street with a paper bag, and that's the version of an alcoholic that people think of. So if you don't look like that, then you're grand, you know. And the reality is
very true.
You know, about 12% of us have some form of addiction to, be it you know, alcohol or cocaine, or you know, for ladies in particular, there's a big codeine dependence, main painkillers.
It's mad how much people take on.
And people will literally go to 20 shops on a Monday to buy, you know, 24 Nurofen in every shop just to get the codeine. And that's a massive thing that people, you know, over time develop, and it's a coping mechanism again. I don't even know what I was talking about there. I tend to ramble on.
No, I've also forgotten, but I was also very intrigued. Do you actually think there's ever a safe level of alcohol and drinking coming from the side of addiction? Not saying that like it's an all or nothing, but is there any?
So for me, as an addict, it is all or nothing.
Yeah, for you, I know,
So, and the thing is, I'm the one with the addiction. So like, if you and I were, you know, out socially, you know, you don't have to adjust your behaviors. I adjust mine, you know, because it's my disease. It's the thing that I'm dealing with. You know, you shouldn't have to change your life, you know, to accommodate me, because, you know, you wouldn't stop eating cake because somebody's diabetic beside you. You know, you just, you know.
Good point,
So, but when it comes to drink, I think in Ireland people binge drink a lot. There is a safe amount of alcohol because, you know, people have drank alcohol since the dawn of time almost, without, you know, destroying their lives from it. But it's when alcohol becomes an issue in your life is when it's no longer manageable, when the negatives of drinking it are starting to impact your life. So am I missing work a little bit more lately, or am I performing in work, or am I late a lot? Am I not sleeping? Am I around with my parents? Am I around with my partner a lot? if those things are starting to build up, then it's an issue, you know, and it's an easy issue to cut out if you're not addicted. For me personally, and you know, some of the science does back it up that, you know, it's a genetic thing, you know, that alcoholism is within families, and my own theory is that it's almost like a hybrid. So you experience things in your life, traumas and negative things that kind of activate like an alcoholic gene within you, and once that gene is activated, you can't switch it off. That's it. But if you're able to, you know, cope in a healthy way before that's activated, then you should be fine.
Yeah,
that makes sense. It's there's plenty of studies out there to support it, but I just know that if I was able to talk, and I know I mentioned this a few times, if I was able to communicate in a safe way my mental health struggles from the age of 12 or before, then I probably wouldn't have ended up in a downward spiral that I was in. And because I'm dealing with all of those things now on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, you know, those traumas and those issues that I had, then the alcoholism doesn't, you know, the drinking and the lust for drink doesn't come up that often. There was one time in the last 3 years where I was close. I was in an AA meeting. I remember I was looking at the clock a lot, because AA meetings go from 8:30 typically till about 9:45. And for your listeners, it is exactly as it is almost on TV. It is very much like, hi, I'm Paddy, I'm an alcoholic. Hey, Paddy, you know, and you know, people go around in a circle and share their experience or how they got through that day. But it's very similar to what you see on the TV. But I remember looking at the clock, and the meeting was over there in 20 to 10. And by 10 o'clock, I was at home and I had a bottle of whiskey. I almost don't remember going to Tesco. I almost don't remember like picking it up, putting it in my basket, but I was at home with it. And this will give you an example of the craziness of addiction. For about 5 hours, I agonized about whether I should or whether I shouldn't. For 5 hours, I had this internal war about whether I should drink it or not. You know, and I rationalized that if I drink it, it'll be okay. And even if things get worse again, you know, I can always just go back to treatment. You know, I'll recognize when it's too much and I'll just go back to treatment. Versus if you drink this, you're going to end up, you know, in the morgue, in hospital. And the reason I poured it down the sink, I didn't drink it. And I was about 7 months sober at the time. And the reason I didn't drink it is not because either side in my mind won. It's because there wasn't enough.
Oh, really?
Wasn't enough. It was only one bottle, and I would need more, and I would need some for the morning as well to take the edge off. So there was no point in even getting a half scenario going, because there wasn't enough. And then and that's the addiction, you know, just creating this scenario, like, kind of, you're either going to do it or you're not going to do it at all.
Do it right or don't.
Yeah, I woke up the following morning, jumped out of the bed. I was so, like, I had a panic attack just even thinking that I drank. And I remembered then, I was like, oh, jeez. You know, I was looking around the room for empty bottles to make sure that I hadn't done anything crazy or anything like that. And that was the last time I was tempted in a kind of a serious way. And I go to restaurants now, you know, with friends and family and stuff. And, you know, if it gets a bit much for me and I'm like, I'm not really, I just leave, you know what I mean? And being sober means I can just drive everywhere, and, you know, I can do my own thing. And, you know, and it's again, you know, my mental health comes first. And when I'm open and honest with everyone and all of my college friends and all of my friends today, you know, they all know that I'm in recovery. And so they know, and so it means that they don't push social situations on me, and they don't say, I just have the one and he'll be grand, or they don't do any of that, because they know that the line is there and they don't cross it. My family are the same. And if people are like that, I just say, I'm a recovering alcoholic, so I can't have that, but I will have a pint of blackcurrant, you know. And, you know, again, people are like, oh, okay, no worries. And again, that transparency really does help in recovery. It really does.
Would you ever, if you're out, would you ever have like a non-alcoholic beer, or is that just too close to?
So people ask about this, and you know, some people have tried it, and for me, it's a no again, because it's like you're doing the ritual of having the bottle in your hand, having the weight of that bottle, and you're drinking, but the buzz never comes. And all that happens is over a period of time, and it might not happen immediately, but over a period of time, you have this, what we call euphoric recall, where you remember the good days of drinking and the good experience of drinking. And you're like, well, I'm lifting the bottle to my mouth. There's no repercussions. Sure, I'll just have the one then instead. And sure, nobody will know the difference. And then one leads to two, and two leads to 800. And that euphoric recall is so dangerous, because even if I'm watching the TV and there's an ad for Jameson or something, and it always looks delicious, you're like, oh, you can taste it almost. And when you're looking at it, it's like, okay, well, now I'm thinking that drinking whiskey is like this heavy-weighted glass in front of a fire, and it's wonderful. And the reality is you're alone in a gas somewhere with empty bottles everywhere. There's not even whiskey in some of the bottles because you can't make it to the bathroom in time and that kind of stuff. And like, you know, it's gross, it's disgusting. And I have to remind myself that that's the reality versus what you know, this euphoric kind of
But you need that full-on reality as well. Like, otherwise you'll be like,
and it's a healthy fear. Like, I don't go through life terrified, but it's a healthy fear that I think is important. And that's one of the reasons why I'm sober. And again, doing that, you know, activity of, you know, sipping, you know, you're just teasing yourself and taunting your addiction to say, come on then, you know, I'm doing this. And in, you know, the statistics from the rehab center that I was in, 97% of people don't get sober on the first visit to rehab. Only 3% stay sober for 2 years after they leave rehab. The odds are against you. They really are stacked against you. And your second time in rehab, 72% fall off the wagon, and then the third time it's 55. So the more you go to rehab, the closer you are to getting sober. You know, so it's very rare that people who go to rehab once stay sober, and people are sober for 10 years and then fall off the wagon as well. So it's a lifelong disease. It's a lifelong journey. But for me now, it's like at the start, it was like, okay, it's a pain in the arse getting into these kind of, you know, structured scenarios, and I know I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But now it's just part of my day to day. You know, I don't even think about, you know, I have an AA meeting tonight. It's just like, oh, you know,
it's a habit. Like, you've formed it. It's part of your routine.
A really good habit, you know, really strong habit, and that means when I'm in a healthy place, then I can do a lot of good things then as well. And I know I was in a live the other night, and you kind of popped in there for a while, and I was in the middle of saying, you know, the amount of energy that I was using to stay drunk, you know, I only use about 10% of that to stay sober and to stay healthy. So that means I have 90% of a reserve there that I can do great things with. And I genuinely believe that I can achieve that. Being open and honest about addiction and stuff is one way, you know, being in school studying psychology is another way, but, you know, using a platform like TikTok to spread particular messages and getting, you know, my voice out there, and hopefully, you know, convincing other people that, you know, equality is important, or, you know, women's rights and women's safety are important, and getting men in particular to recognize that the term "not all men" is silly, because it is all women, you know.
How many men have gotten mad at you for that one?
Well, yeah, I mean, I used to be like that as well. I used to, in my kind of drinking days, would be like, oh, it's not all men, because, you know, you can't, oh, you all just hate men and all of that kind of stuff. And the reality is now I listen to the trauma, I accept it immediately. It's like, yeah, well, why would you tell me that there was a trauma when there's no trauma? I listen, I accept, I apologize that it happened, and I make a vow to. So this is a typical interaction. I'm sorry that happened to you. It's not something I do myself. I will call that out in every opportunity that I have. And is there anything I could do now to help you feel better? Yeah. That reaction is far better than "not all men, you hate me, why do you hate me?" And if you're more worried about your own insecurities, and you're more worried about your masculinity in that moment when somebody is being vulnerable and sharing an incident that happened, then that's a big issue for you. Yeah. And you're going to have more issues like that down the line. You know, when the lady is thriving because she was open and she was able to talk about things in a healthy way, you're going to go into a downward spiral, because it's, that tells me that there's a lot more red flags behind the scene, and that need to be explored.
Do you think, well, I'm not, like, no, this is very, like, wide and broad, that mightn't be the case, but, like, the men who are offended by that are the type of men that could get caught in that situation, that could cause that situation?
I so that there wouldn't be a correlation between men who are really kind of defensive about it. Like, the reality is there's only a very small percentage of men who are deviant in a kind of predator way, but every man alive has catcalled or whistled or eyed up in a kind of unnecessary way, or locker room talk and that kind of stuff. So every man has done that, but it doesn't mean that they're going to act on it in a physical way.
Yeah.
But I think lots of men dismiss their toxic masculinity because they say, well, I'd never act on it in a physical
So it's okay because I wouldn't actually do it.
And they give themselves kind of a buy, like a hall pass for the verbal stuff, because they would never act on things in a physical way, and trying to get that message that the verbal and emotional stuff is just as bad, because there's so much of it that you can't just give yourself a pass. You have to hold yourself accountable. And people really need to go from the mindset of, I need to treat all women in my life the way I treat the most valuable and most wonderful woman in their life. So, I would never treat anybody who I wouldn't be, comfortable saying the same thing to my mother, because she'd give me a clout around a year if I was disrespectful. But, so you treat people with that kind of reverence and with that kind of respect, regardless of who they are, regardless of what they're wearing, regardless of what music they're listening to, or the color of their hair, or who they're with, or who they're not with. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter at all. It's that song is viral now on TikTok, 97%, and it's about 97% of women have been subject to some form, whether it's verbal, physical, emotional trauma at the hands of men. And that's too big a number. That's too big a number. And especially the age at which they're subjected to that type of behavior. It's very young, and people remember that. People remember the first time that their creepy uncle eyed them up when they were 7 years old. People remember when they were drunk on a night out, that there was that one guy who, had his hands in a particular place longer than he should have. People remember that, and that stays with them. And there's an accumulation then. Individually, these instances are not, it won't break a person. But if you've got hundreds of those over a period of years, then absolutely that's a lot of baggage to have. And why the hell should women be carrying around that kind of baggage when men get to waltz around carefree? I never worry about the street that I walk down. I'm a big guy. It's never crossed my mind that, if I walk down here, that this group of lads are going to, never. Or this group of women. I never, ever done. I go for a lot of walks, and a few days ago, I was cross paths with a female on our walk, and it's a remote enough area, but I could tell immediately, and as these discussions are happening online a lot, that she was uncomfortable, because I'm a big guy, it's a remote area, and I could tell she kind of hesitated with the stride that she was in, and became very aware that she was uncomfortable. And not that she needed to be, but I could tell she was uncomfortable. And it didn't cost me anything to do, but I just turned around and went back the way I came. And looking back over my shoulder, I could see that her stride had come back, and she seems, now I might have been completely wrong. I might have been completely right, but it didn't cost me anything just to do that. And I made that choice so that she didn't have to make any choices. She could just continue on her walk. And that's the mindset we need to have until we get to a point where women are no longer afraid of what a man might say or do in a vulnerable spot.
It's funny actually, all that, because it made me realize, I would go out walking a lot, and I like going out in the dark. Just sometimes I'm too lazy to do anything during the day, and I'm like, right, I'm going out in the dark. And I would walk the beach a lot because the beach right beside me, but I won't go down the beach in the dark. because there could be teens or all sorts of people in the sand dunes and around. I can't see what's going on. I'll go up the coast road and back down the coast road, but it kind of never thought about it until this whole thing came out, and I was like, oh yeah, I do it all the time.
Yeah.
Because like I'm 5'2", I'm pretty vicious, but I can't take on a couple of people.
I know, and but why should you have to make that decision? You know, why should you feel now? It's not even as bad in Ireland as it is in other countries. You know, in the USA, for example, it's, you know, people are reared to think that women should be submissive far more than in Ireland, and it's good now that we've kind of broken away and we've become independent from the church, and so we don't have that kind of sexual regulation that we used to have as a society. So things are changing, but then you have new waves of the porn industry, you know, sexualization of kids and young girls at an early age. You know, people pop their cherry at a very young age now as well, compared to what it was back in my day, for example. So things are changing, so we need to be very aware of those. And I talk about this a lot, about politics, about, you know, how to change the world, and it always comes down to education. If we teach our kids at the age of 4 and 5 how it is to interact with people, what's acceptable and what's not, and call people out and hold people accountable, even at the age of 4, for their behaviors, then that's a learned behavior that you know, becomes part of who they are over time. And they don't break those kind of rules and those norms when they get into their teens, so that, you know, so girls in particular don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. So that not all men thing really wrecks my head, but there's hope, because I was that cohort of people who said that, and then just through awareness and learning, I'm now a complete ally for the complete opposite side, and I will call out guys who say not all men all of the time.
Funny enough, I mostly hang out with guys. It's just I've always been like that. I'm a real tomboy type, but all the lads around me have been, bar one, have been like not even commenting on the whole not all men thing, because they like accept it, you know what I mean? Thankfully they're not getting offended by it, because they know it's not all men. They're not like, they don't feel the need to say it, you know?
Yeah, I heard a stupid analogy that was used a couple of days ago, and I was like, oh, if a woman was hit by a car on a night out, would she be terrified of cars for the rest of her life? And, you know, I replied, well, no, but if 97% of women were hit by cars, you know, that's clearly an issue, you know, and it's very difficult to get people who think like that to think outside of themselves. And, you know, but I used to be there. So it is possible, but it just takes time and a willingness from the subject, from the person in question, to change and to be open to that change, you know. And people like this, you might give them so much evidence and peer-reviewed studies and data and statistics, and because they haven't seen it or experienced it themselves, then it's not real, you know.
Yeah, there's a lot of people like that.
You might as well be talking to an anti-vaxxer or talking to a Trump supporter then, in that instance, you know.
Yeah, you can't help them.
Yeah, you can't.
No. So that's like most of the questions, bar the last one. Did you see that in the email?
Saw something there, yeah.
So I love asking this question because it really makes people think. So what is the best advice that someone ever gave you?
So I did think about it, and you know, I've been lucky since I got sober in particular. People give me advice all the time, and it's really good stuff. But the most profound thing and advice that somebody said to me was in treatment. I was 3 days in treatment, and there was a nun who was 87 years of age, a frail old woman, and she had this presence about her. I'm not a religious man, I'm an atheist, but Sister Concilio is her name, and she sat down with me and she was chatting away to me, and she just said to me, you know, your biggest mistake and the thing that you need to change is you forgot along the way that you're a good person. You forgot, completely forgot. And I burst out crying, like I burst out into tears, because it was true. I had been so preoccupied with trying to be a character and trying to be somebody that I wasn't, and then protecting that identity for 25 years of my life, that I forgot that underneath it all, I'm just a good person who's lost their way.
Yeah.
And she said that to me, and it stuck with me ever since, that I'm a good person, and that my actions and behaviors every day mean at the end of the day, I'm still a good person or I'm not. And even in the morning, I can wake up and a good person again, even if I made some mistakes previously. So yeah, when she said that, it was like, and I was in a very emotional and vulnerable state anyway, because I was shaking in the chair from the DTs, and she just said, "You just forgot you're a good person," and that was my biggest mistake. She said, "Your biggest mistake in your life is forgetting that you're a good person."
That's
I think
amazing.
everybody needs to just remember that as well, because if we were a good person before, we're still a good person now. There's just a whole lot of crap that we have to move out of the way.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's the type of thing you were looking for.
That is perfect. That's brilliant, actually. It is. It's a really good thing, because I think people do need to remember that as well. Like, you're spot on with that one. It's a really, really good one. Absolutely. So I love asking this question.
Yeah, it's a great question to have. And again, like you said, it lets people think, and the tone of this interview is, probably was inspired by that question as well, in the email. So I appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. So last thing, where can everyone find you, Paddy?
Yeah, so like I'm on TikTok, obviously. Paddy the Panda is my handle there, and that's kind of where I'm most vocal. I do a podcast as well called Conversations with Paddy the Panda, and that's on my YouTube channel, which again is Paddy the Panda, and all of my handles are on that. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I'm not a massive social media person, but definitely TikTok is the place to find me. And you never know, in the next few years, I could be, I don't know, president of the world or something, depending on how I go.
Over after me,
well, Michael he's a good man, isn't he? Or me, all Martin.
Yeah.
No, that's not.
Yeah, I got them two mixed up. I meant to say Michael D, and I was like, they're both called Michael. I just get the Irish because he always speaks Irish.
Oh, I'd never be a Fianna Fáil man anyway. But that's a conversation for a different day. We don't want to go back to the Civil War. But yeah, look, so that's where I'm at, and thanks very much for inviting me on here. It was a privilege. Thanks very much.
It was a brilliant story, and I think hopefully it can help some people as well, maybe people that don't realise that they may have a slight addiction issue, or maybe even evaluate.
Just to add, the one thing I will say is that ever since I asked for help, and when everything was taken away and I was just like, okay, I need to ask for help, from the first time I have ever asked for help to today when I've asked for help, it's always been there. Help is always there. You just need to get out of your own way, and once you ask for it, it's liberating, and it will always be there. And if you just Google AA, and there's a service called Ardú as well, which is in most local areas. That's a counselling service, and those are free services. Ardú, ARDU FODA. If you just Google those are your first steps in order to get help. And the very best of luck to everyone.
Perfect, thank you. And as ever with everyone, you can find me still on Instagram and TikTok at Christy H Fitness. And thanks again, Paddy.
No worries, thanks very much.
Thank you again for listening to the Why Not podcast. It really means a lot that you are listening in, and I would love if you could please leave a review on Apple Podcasts or subscribe on Spotify. And always, I'd love to hear feedback personally, so if you do want to leave me a message and let me know how you found the podcast, please do.